All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Read More. I'm Trevor, and joining me this week is San Diego's very own author, artist, and screenwriter, Patrick Loveland. Hi, Patrick. How you
Hey,
doing?
all right, how are you?
Good, good. So,
Sure.
a question I always ask everybody on this show, you're, I think, guest number 4, is what are you reading right now you could tell us about that you're excited about? Like,
Okay.
you got any
Right now,
titles that you're kind of
yeah,
working through at the moment? Doesn't have to be a library book.
gotcha. Yeah, right now, the problem with me right now is I always have a lot of books that I am reading,
Yeah.
so I'm slow to finish, and it makes it even worse when I like to read short story collections. So I'll have like several short story collections going at once. So right now I'm reading old copy I found of Ramsey Campbell's Alone
Oh,
with the Horrors. This is great so far.
Ramsey Campbell. Yes.
He's,
He has a new one out this year
yeah, I haven't checked it out yet.
that I was going to check out, and then I deferred for other stuff. But now maybe I'm thinking maybe I should have gone for him.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying that. I'm trying to catch up, going that far back, obviously. But and once again, also checking out Thomas Ligotti,
Oh,
Songs of a Dead Dreamer.
Thomas Ligotti. I'll put that on the feeder
Oh, does it?
there. Yeah, for people who don't know, Ligotti, kind of like, how would you describe him? Like a latter-day Lovecraft of nihilism.
Yeah, very much nihilistic and
Yeah,
bleak and weird, but in a very, from my readings, quieter. Definitely not always quiet, but definitely a kind of, yeah, just eerie offness.
yeah, weird.
Yeah,
Capital
very weird.
W, weird. So let's
Breaking
talk
things.
about some of your stuff. Both, it's like, wow, Ramsey Campbell and Ligotti, both who I think kind of like relate back to some of your work. So today I think we're mainly talking about, now is it 2017 or 2018? Too Many Eyes came out.
It was 2019.
Oh, 2019.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in a time warp because of
No,
COVID.
that's fine. I understand.
So, tell us about Too Many Eyes, just for people who don't know your book, just kind of the elevator pitch.
Okay. Well, Too Many Eyes started as I had had enough short stories out, a good amount of short stories out, and it occurred to me that I could collect them into like a volume. And originally it was going to be called something different, and I can't remember the inspiration for it, but just Too Many Eyes hit me as this is really kind of like grindhousey title for something, just like Too Many Eyes or something like that. And I was like, you know what, I kind of like that. And then a story I'd had kind of percolating for a short story submission to an anthology, that I wasn't able to get it put together all the way so I didn't even submit it to that anthology. But it was about experimental films that are haunted or strange or something like that. And so I took the short story concept, and while I was writing it, one of the reasons I hadn't finished it was because I had this bigger idea that I was going to do as a continuation if I got the short story published. And then I realized, what if the short story I had envisioned could be like the beginning of a larger story? And so when I decided to put together the Too Many Eyes collection, that was going to be called The Place Where It Rains, from the title for the first story, which is a weird Western, A Quiamac, The Place Where It Rains. I was like, wait, I like Too Many Eyes more. It's like bold, it kind of jumps out in that grindy, pulpy way. And I kind of reformed the haunted film prints idea I'd had from that submission into a whole novella. So Too Many Eyes is the title of the collection, but it's also a novella in the middle. It's about 100 pages itself. And it's about a film print that shows up at a one-screen art house that's actually modeled after the Ken Theater here.
Oh,
I called it the REM, I think short for Remington, but it's, yeah, the Kensington Theater. and because I've always loved that place, grew up going there.
Yeah.
So I even tried to use my memory to figure out the floor plan of the Ken, because the whole intro sequence is basically the Ken.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I've mentioned that before, but so it starts out in this one screen art house, and they screen this art print they're going to show the next day. They test screen it. They're going to show the next day for like a festival, and it just basically rips a hole in dimensions, and it becomes this really horrifying thing. And then it ends up in a multiplex in San Francisco. It gets really weird. But so the book itself started as just a way to compile some short stories I'd had collecting from getting them published in periodicals and anthologies. And I just really got attached to this novella idea and went with it. And that's kind of where it came from.
Awesome. So, and that's with Stay Strange Press.
Yeah.
And now you had a title out before that. Forgive me, I can't recall your very first book.
My first novel was, it was published as A Tear in the Veil by a Canadian imprint called April Moon Books. And they're great. It just didn't work out in the long run, so the rights were returned to me. And I'm actually in the process of revising it to release with Stay Strange publications. Right, but it's going to go back to its working title. It was originally a screenplay I wrote called 5150, and that was the manuscript's, like the whole working title for the manuscript as a novel. And then we kind of decided to go with something else right before publishing. But I always liked that because it's kind of core to the idea. Are you familiar with what that means? Or
that it was what?
5150, what that refers to?
You know I've heard the expression before.
It's a common, it's kind of colloquially it means someone's crazy or yes. off, because it's a California penal code for someone
yes.
who's a danger to themselves or others. And that was kind of core to the feeling of that novel. So just so in the future when I start talking about 5150, A Tear in the Veil is going to be republished as 5150.
Oh, okay.
But that was the first book.
That was your first. And now also just for fans and for folks watching Read More here, just learning about you, you have a new book for 2020. So tell us a little bit about that one.
Okay. Yeah, that one is, so got my visual aids here. This is Too Many Eyes. I don't know if you have. And then the new one is called The Europa Ascent. And so what the Europa Ascent is this was actually a short story I wrote after I finished it, or we put out A Tear in the Veil. Actually, I finished the manuscript a couple of years before it got put out by April Moon. I started going into short story writing because I kind of did it backwards. I put a novel out and then I went to short stories because I kind of got a phobia of short stories years before. I had kind of I seated my pants to a short story without really editing it, and it got denied years before. So I was like, oh, I'm terrible at short stories. So I didn't write any shorts or get any published until after my first novel was done. So I went into short stories and I wrote this sci-fi horror story called just Europa Ascent when I wrote it. And it was basically about so Europa is thought to have, through the scientific observation, an ice crust out that encases an ocean, between the ice crust and its core and like all that. So I envisioned a research facility on the underside of the ice crust that sends drones down into the water there. And so obviously it doesn't go that well. They find something, and it's like an ancient alien machine down the core surface of Europa's ocean, and then these creatures kind of observe their drone and they follow it back to the station, and it doesn't go well for anybody. So it's basically a sci-fi horror homage. It's definitely got layers of homage to like my favorite sci-fi horror, like Alien, the best Alien films, and then John Carpenter's The Thing. Oh yeah. I'd even say the 80s version of The Blob was very influential, because I had rewatched The Blob a little before writing the novella version, and I remembered it being disturbing but it being really cheesy, and I watched it again. It was actually a lot better than I remembered. I mean, yeah, it's still kind of cheesy, but it's got great practical effects and things in it. So there's definitely a a real fluid kind of amorphousness to the creatures in Europa Ascent. But anyway, so it went from a short story, and then I had someone read it because they were thinking about putting out a sci-fi horror periodical, and they actually said they thought it would be cool as a novella that short story was part of, and that's where the idea was from. And I wrote it as a novella and had it put out through Darker Worlds Publishing.
Yeah, now it's available as an ebook, or it's in print as well?
It's in print, and print and ebook.
Okay. So do check out the Europa Ascent. I'll put something on the feeder there. And I know Too Many Eyes, for folks interested in that one, that is available in San Diego Public Library catalog. So either just give us a call or search it up. You can place a hold today. And, well, you mentioned The Blob. That just made me think, a total aside. Did you ever see that 80s horror movie, The Stuff?
Yes, I did.
Watch that. My wife's a big horror movie fan.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Not quite as maybe horrifying, but
yeah, kind of is so bad it's good, but definitely has its moments.
The Stuff for the available only on VHS.
And if you liked The Stuff, you should also watch Street Trash.
Street Trash.
Yeah, that is in the same realm, but probably even lower budget and not amazing, but it's fun to watch.
Ooh, I don't think I know that one.
I haven't seen it in 20 years, but I remember being very entertained by it. It's a strange movie.
I feel like I could talk about 80s horror like all day.
That is my favorite. 70s and 80s horror is still, in my opinion, the pinnacle. Yeah, so much practical effects and just the atmosphere they could achieve. But that's a whole other conversation, sure.
For sure. Well, to relate that back, so it seems like a lot of your interests they run a gamut: horror, science fiction. I want to touch on your art and your screenwriting as well, but just to wrap up kind of the writing, do you see yourself as kind of like a genre writer, or you're happy to push the envelope in your own kind of idiosyncratic way with this stuff, but do you see yourself like the publishers you look for? Do you kind of look for that, okay, who wants genre, and then just let me twist it? Or do you feel like you kind of just work out of your own inspirations because that's what you're into and that's what you love? Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. It's interesting. Trying to think of how to answer this question. So I just write what I like to write, and that's very heavily kind of genre. I do like to mess with it, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to present myself as some super original genius. I'm very much into pulpy, like horror, sci-fi, things like that. I like to weave more stuff into it, but at the end of the day, I like to thrill and entertain. So I do really like more literary horror, if you want to call it that, but I definitely enjoy writing pulpy, more thrill-oriented stuff generally. I definitely have. So I'd like to try some different styles, but my natural instinct is to kind of write. And also, a lot of people have mentioned it, so I'll just own it. Is I write what's described as like a cinematic style.
Okay.
And obviously, I think I started as a screenwriter, aspiring screenwriter, and I was actually a film student who who went into screenwriting, and then my screenplays kept being too long, and but I'm like, I don't know if I can tell these ideas, any shorter than this. And I kept having to cut out stuff that I didn't see as darlings. I really felt like I was cutting out stuff that should be there. Then I'm like, okay, so maybe I should just have my screenplay ideas I can keep to 100 pages or 110 pages at the most. And then I decided maybe I should try. I did pretty well in English in high school, so I'm like, I'll try, writing prose. And it was a learning curve to get back to, thinking so much about grammar and things like that. But this is in the very beginning, so like 15, 18 years ago. Now I'm just rambling, I'm sorry. But the point being, I think that a lot of I get it described as cinematic a lot, and I think it's because I do envision things from a screenwriter's perspective, I'd say. I can't deny that. And so I do think because of coming from screenwriting and a love of making film and film creation education, I think that was kind of fused into how I tell stories, was a desire to thrill and to use like, that kind of pacing. So it helped me a lot with plotting and excitement and entertainment. But sometimes it actually takes more work for me to write something that's a little more, quiet or introspective. But yeah, so.
No, I feel like a lot of, at least writers that I've read could have used a little bit like screenwriting background and maybe help them with some mechanics and fundamentals. So that's interesting. That sets me up. So with you, kind of the triple threat, author, artist, screenwriter. So screenwriting came first, or were you kind of? Tell us about your art and some of that.
Okay, well, art, if we're gonna look at it that way, came way definitely first.
Oh, okay.
I started drawing when I was about 4 or 5, and I have minimal actual art education in that realm. Like in junior high and high school, I took art classes for easy grades or whatever, but I learned a lot, and they give you a lot of fundamentals in early art classes. And then I went to a fine art school to be a film student, and but I only ever I took a painting class the first semester I think I was there, and I guess it was bad luck because all the other painters there who were more experienced with painting classes told me that the teacher was a great painter but not a great teacher. And I'm like, okay, so I took one painting class and she made me work on this one painting I hated for the whole semester, and you could say that might be a good thing, but it ended up being a mess. But so art-wise, my education was, elementary up through high school, and then I went to a school full of great, graphic, painting and, artists, sculptors, but I did experimental film. And so I didn't really pursue that part of myself creatively for a long time, but I always was drawing concept sketches and things like that. So I used that as kind of something that could help me with what I wanted to do, which was from the time of high school. I made a short horror film. I decided I just loved filmmaking as a concept. And so after that, for a longest time, art was basically a way of me to sketch out scenes and stuff for short films or films I was planning. Concept art. Once in a while I would do something that was more conceptual or just like, just art for the art's sake. But it was that way for a long time. And then a few years ago, I started doing these Post-its. It sounds silly, but I was at work and I had all these office supplies, and during a meeting or, in between things, I would just sketch a little Post-it of something. And I actually got really into them. Some of the Post-its are pretty intricate. And I was like, I really just like drawing sometimes. And I started getting more serious about drawing again. The Post-its got bigger. And then, I got another sketchbook and I started working again, just kind of sketching. And then started doing watercolor again. I had always liked doing watercolor. Oh, wow. I do watercolor pencils, but I've also been trying to do like straight watercolor from tubes. And I started to get more and more happy with the progress I was making from actually doing it again. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I've just kind of rediscovered that part and been more serious about it, which is confusing because most of my focus has been writing for years. So now I have to split time. And but I did the covers for Too Many Eyes and Europa Ascent myself. Those are basically, Europa Ascent is actually mostly watercolor, and then the Too Many Eyes cover it's like pencil and charcoal and some watercolor pencils, but I didn't mix water into all of it to give it more of a rough look. Anyway, so yeah, I do that, and I've been considering, I've been sketching a lot of ideas for a graphic novel that I'd like to hypothetically do. I mean, like probably start as a web comic, but more like a comic book than like a strip.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Gosh, I'm trying to think like where to go from there. Yeah, I guess so. So with the art and the writing and the screenwriting, it really seems like from back to front, you can kind of cover a lot of ground creatively to just flesh out an idea. And I guess, well, you use the word cinematic, and I'm like, wow, I kind of see how you could come up with that term for fleshing out something.
Yeah, I am very much I see people in the horror writing community say it a lot. I'm sure it's probably a relatively common thing with writers, but there seem to be two major schools of fleshing out an idea, and it's the outliners and the pantsers, as it's usually referred to, as in like seat of your pants. So pantsers, basically, they have a vague idea, they have some characters, maybe a beginning and an end and some stuff that happens, but then they just start writing. I'm not that at all. And some people, that's a lot of people, and they do great stuff. And sometimes there's probably brilliant stuff that wouldn't have happened if they'd overthought it at the beginning, but that's definitely not me. I'm very much an outlining person. I like to outline, and I make like, as I said, I go so far as to do like elaborate design sketches of a scene that only exists in my head for writing purposes. Nobody's going to see other than that, but it's so that I can have a sense of place when I write it. And I like to think that's conveyed. But yeah, so I like to outline. I think that comes from the screenwriting background too, because I had a really hard time, because I went to, like I said, I went to a fine art school for film. So I was kind of an art and film student, and we were a fine art experimental film program. So we weren't taught storytelling. I didn't learn storytelling in college. I did 3 out of 4 years. I didn't actually finish, but I wasn't taught anything about storytelling in that period. I was stumbling myself to learn it. After coming back down here, I went to school in the Bay Area, and I ended up back down here in my hometown, and I was trying to, like, I'd be sitting there with, like, wide ruled paper, like college ruled paper, and just trying to, like, write out an outline, but I had no frame of reference for how to do that. And I stumbled upon someone who was kind of a mentor and helped me with some books on screenwriting and stuff, and screenwriting really helped me to develop ideas through the outlining process of like beats and major story act structure that goes back to obviously like Greek storytelling, stuff like that. But I can see that it might be really liberating and interesting to just go by the seat of your pants, but outlining really helps me, because once I've got that at least skeletal outline, I feel like you can kind of play within the notes, or however you want to think of it. Like I know where it's going to go for the most part between these nodes of storytelling points, these moments or things that need to happen. So that actually frees me up to figure out how I get there in between. So I almost think that it's like a hybrid thing where I outline in the beginning now, but I allow myself to pants here and there in between those moments that I need to hit. So anyway, that's kind of how I go about it. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
No, yeah, absolutely. And like stuff about process for me, hopefully for folks watching this too, it's like, how do people write? I guess I could say, and I don't mind saying, like, as someone who attempts to write, I think like earlier this summer I went on a jag. I was trying to write short stories. Mm-hmm. I guess I am a seatser or a pantser, as you call it.
Yeah.
But like, and I used to outline things, but my God, it's so hard. And it's almost like sometimes I feel like for me, outlining diminishes. Like, I'm like, well, if I already know where this is going, I'm not excited about it anymore. But that's just me.
Interesting. Okay, maybe that explains a lot. That might explain to me why a lot of people do that.
I took creative writing classes as an undergrad. Mm-hmm. And 2 classes, I think, were under Ron Carlson, who short story writer. He got Me Too'd. Actually, people can, this was years ago,
really?
But Ron Carlson, yeah, you can look up and news stories on him. But excellent writer, and his whole thing was he would teach the class where it's like your act of writing is a process of discovery, where not only you're discovering what's happening in the story with your character, but that will kind of refract back on your own internal discovery. And it was a little bit, I don't want to say, it was a little airy, but he would, he could talk it up so well. I mean, he's a MFA professor guy, so yeah. You learn to talk in circles. A lot of people are like, yeah, okay, I don't have to outline, awesome. But I always kind of wish maybe I'd gotten a little bit more like what you're describing, where it's like, no, 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 like we're gonna. Do you storyboard stuff?
I do sometimes.
Okay.
I usually storyboard when it's actually going to be something like a video or animation. I also dabbling in animation after years. I used to do a little stop motion, but now I'm trying to do like cell drawn. That's a whole other thing. That I probably won't ever get very far into that. I
Hey.
did a couple of intros for Sam's video series with Stay Strange.
Yes.
They're rough,
Bookworms?
but I was pretty happy with them. Yeah, I did the Bookworms one, and I did the.
Yeah, I hope he does more.
Yeah, no, I'm working on something. I won't say. I can't speak for him, but I'm working on another animation. We'll see. But I do storyboard. I don't usually storyboard for like if it's going to be a script or something. I definitely do. But I do reserve storyboarding usually for something that's going to be visual. But I do write outlines. But going back to what you were saying, I could totally see that. I respect the whole it sounds silly to call it pantsing, but I respect that approach, and I can see why people would really feel that way. And I read a little bit, not extensively, but I read some Kerouac and Beat stuff when I was younger, and I get the whole. I mean, yeah, Kerouac, if I remember correctly, he had to modify a typewriter so he could basically run scrolls through it because he didn't want to stop typing, and I respect that. And he obviously hated. And if you're familiar with him at all, he hated the concept of editing. And I could see that at the time, stream of consciousness, I understand it. But when it came to trying to tell a story for myself, I really felt like in order to really know what my story was going to be, I needed to at least know the main points. At the very minimum, beginning and end, with a rough idea of how they get there. But it's interesting that you brought up short stories, because I do actually do short stories a little different. Yeah, depending on the story, and that's the problem too. Do we have more time or?
Yeah, we're good.
Short stories are interesting because I've come to really love doing them. Like I said, I had kind of a phobia about them, and I didn't do them for years. But when I got back into it, the first one I got published, I did about 4 or 5 before I got one published, and that's actually with April Moon Books. They had a great series of like sci-fi horror short story anthologies called Short Sharp Shocks. And I got into the second one, and then I was in all 3 after that. I didn't know about the first one, or I would have tried. But the second was called Stomping Grounds, and it was an homage to like kaiju and like big monster stuff. And my first short story that got published was the one I just severely cut down the most, because I would while I was still outlining, I realized that the shorter and cleaner and like kind of tighter that the story was, the more it kept the idea together in short story realm. So when I first got published short story, I would always try and tell like a short movie in a really short space. But then I realized I kept getting editors telling me like, I like what you're doing, but you're trying to do too much. And so it worked against me in that respect, where I would try to get like a short movie, like a movie into like 5,000 words or 3,000 words. And I realized that wasn't necessarily what people wanted from a short story. And I did some of my shorts more rough idea of beginning and end, and then a lot more pantsing, I'd say, in between. But short stories are their own whole thing, and I have a lot of respect for them.
Oh gosh,
definitely a different way of writing.
Again, like 80s horror, I feel like I could do a whole episode just talking about the art of short stories. I mean, maybe we'll do that in the future.
Yeah, just a whole series.
It sounds like you know your stuff.
Yeah.
So just to kind of wrap, then, obviously you're a very experienced writer. Like, it sounds like you've been after this as a craft, as well as like an art, like your own like creation, your creative spirit for a while. What do you have any advice you would give to like other writers watching this, people who maybe they don't go after it like they should, but they have that spark in the back of their head? Anything at all you'd want to offer up to folks to kind of, you know,
I guess I would say that you really have to do it. you have to. It's one thing to have some ideas, and because I have met people, and I'm not hating or anything like that, but I've met people who talk about writing a lot. and they talk about ideas they have, and they might be great ideas, but they don't do the work. And I don't want to sound, I mean, because I'm not what you would call successful, but I have been studying and working at the craft for years.
You take it seriously.
Yeah, I take it very seriously, and I can be silly. I post a lot of absurd memes and stuff, and I don't talk about myself much online, but I when it comes to writing, I'm actually really serious about craft. When it comes to screenwriting or short stories or novels or anything, I take the creative endeavors very seriously, and I do think that I'm a much better writer than when I started. I actually had a local musician friend. He read Too Many Eyes first. He really enjoyed it, and then there were still some physical copies floating around of A Tear in the Veil, and he grabbed a copy at a reading I did, and he read it, and he's like, the ideas are great, but your writing's come a long way. And it was like, for a minute I was like, oh, but then I was like, you know what? That's great. I'm glad to hear that I've learned, a lot because I was writing. I think there's an old saying, like, I can't remember who said it, but it basically said you have to write like 500,000 words before you're decent at writing. It's a bit much probably, but it kind of falls. I think there was an old attributed to samurai kind of period Japan saying you have to swing a sword 20,000 times before you can do it the most efficient way. And it kind of feels in a way that's true. You have to keep writing. And there's no obviously just write or just read and write. You have to read all the time if you write. Some rules I think are a little overstated, but I do think that the most basic one is to be a writer, you have to write. And,
I feel like I've heard something like you got to put your ass in the chair.
That is very, very true.
I don't know who said that.
I can't remember. I've heard that for sure. And that's kind of what I'm talking about is it's just like ideas are great. And another thing that people have to get used to in writing is that ideas, it sounds dismissive or minimalizing it, but ideas are kind of a dime a dozen. It took me a long time to accept this because I was very protective and neurotic of my ideas because I like to twist things and do certain things. So when I saw somebody else completely unrelated from me do the same twist themselves, I was like, no, because they kind of beat you to the punch. But that showed me something over the years, and that's that while ideas are great, it's about how you implement the ideas, what you do with them.
Yeah.
And getting them out there is also important. So if you're one of those people who writes for yourself or creates for yourself, you can go at your own pace and that's fine. But if you do want to get stuff out there, it's important to get it to a point where it's as high quality as it can be and what that means to you. But I would say like a certain minimum level of professional present. Definitely have it edited, at least copy edited. And always have someone read your work. I can look over the same thing 30 times and I won't see it because I typed it. But somebody looks at it and goes, oh, there's that. I'm like, I looked at that just 5 minutes ago. I didn't see it. But so come down to, you have to write to get better and to get it done. And it does take time. But I think if you really want to do it, that's what it takes. It's just writing.
That is awesome. Great advice for me. I feel like you've inspired me today with all this talk of writing.
Good.
I always beating myself up. But today we've been talking with Patrick Loveland. The main book we're talking, Too Many Eyes. Do check it out with the library. Great horror sci-fi kind of anthology. Mr. Loveland, Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been Read More. We'll see you next time.